come on up here.
Oh.
Yeah, Josh. All right, he's going to pray for us.
Dear God, thank you so much that we have this day for Bible study and that we can learn more about how the Bible is more true than anything else, and that evolution, that all of the stuff just doesn't point to evolution but to creation. And thank you so much that we can do this today. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, buddy.
Thank you.
Nice job.
Good job.
All right. Okay, so from a raise of hands, who here went to the movie last night?
No
Huh?
spoiler alert.
About half.
Monday.
Yes. So there was going to be only one showing, which was last night, but we filled up the theater, which was wonderful. So apparently they're doing a second showing on Monday night, or April 1st. Is that Monday? Is it Monday? Okay. 7 o'clock?
Yep.
7 o'clock? Okay. Yeah, I would highly encourage you to do it. It went over a lot of the stuff that we've talked about already, and it went over stuff that we haven't talked about yet that I fully intend on going over. But it was just encouraging for me to see, oh, okay, they're in line with us. They're saying what we said, and so I would encourage you to do it, even if I don't know if I really want to, just to support a movie like this, okay? We're getting more and more Christian movies come in, but they always do them for just a couple days because they think nobody's going to come. And so filling up that theater last night made them say, oh, we better do another one of these. So I would just encourage you to go and see it, even if you're just kind of iffy about it, just to encourage the producers, to encourage the theater owners and all that to bring in more movies like this. They had a bunch of previews there of other Christian movies coming in, and for those of you who were there last night, here's a little spoiler alert, but not bad. No, it's no spoiler. There is, after the credits, there's about a 20-minute interview with the scientists. So for those of you who left during the credits, if you'd have stayed, they did another 20-minute interview with just the panel of the scientists and a little bit more information on that. So anyway, for you guys who are going, it's worth hanging out. All right, cool. Well, we're continuing our phase 2 of our series on evolution, and phase 2 has more to do with the earth itself and not so much the life on the earth. We've gone through, did evolution happen, the fossil record and all of that. Now we're looking at, okay, is the earth really billions of years old, or do they just need it to be billions of years old in order to accomplish evolution? Okay? Darwin, but when he published his book, everybody believed in a young earth at that time. And it was about 20 years later that another guy came along and wrote a book called Principles of Geology, and he is the first one who came up with this idea of long ages. And he did it because Darwin had published his book 20 years earlier, and this guy realized, if what Darwin said is true, this earth has got to be a lot older than 6,000 years old. It's got to, in order for that to happen, it's got to be millions, maybe billions of years old. And so that concept came along because of evolution 20 years later. So what we're looking at today, last week and today, is looking at the geography of our world. And we're always told that, oh, this took millions of years and that took and so what I want to do tonight is just go through and touch on mainly a bunch of the national parks here in the western United States to just give you a taste of the evidence that is out there that it was a flood that formed all of these things, not millions and billions of years, okay? So a lot of these ones will be local national parks, but we'll start with Yellowstone, okay? I love Yellowstone. And this is a hill in Yellowstone called Specimen Ridge. Okay, and on Specimen Ridge, there are a bunch of petrified trees in the upright position. They're kind of all over the place here. And what they used to say is each one of these trees, they're all at a different level. And so they say all these trees represent millions of years worth of forests. One forest would grow and then it would be destroyed by some kind of volcanic activity and then build up layers, and then another forest would grow on that, and millions of years later it would get destroyed, and there's like 27 forests here, okay? That's what they say happened. We say this is one event, that this happened during the Noah's flood, and that it's not millions of years old. So where do we go to figure out this? Here's some of the standing trees here. And it looks like they grew there, doesn't it? I mean, you'd think, if you didn't know any better, you'd think those trees grew there. Here's what the sign used to say, and I emphasize used to say. Across the valley rise the slopes of Specimen Ridge, but the forest you see there today is only the latest chapter in a remarkable story. Buried within the volcanic rocks that compose the mountain are 27 distinct layers of fossil forests that flourished 50 million years ago. Okay? 27 forests, as I just explained. Well, Mount St. Helens to the rescue. I was just telling somebody today that the creation science movement really got started in the 1970s by the Institute for Creation Research, by a man named Henry Morris. And he's got a great study Bible, by the way, that I would encourage. It's one of my favorites. It's called, I think it's just called the Henry Morris Study Bible. Anyway, he comes at the Bible from a young earth creationist viewpoint, and it's very good. Anyway, he started this in the late 70s, and they're just starting to figure out the science at this point. And then in 1980, Mount St. Helens erupts as almost a gift from God, to say, okay, you Christians ready? I'm going to give you something to work with now, okay? So Mount St. Helens, we talked about it last week, how it laid down layer after layer after layer in one day, thousands of layers of strata. And then 2 years later, in one day, a flood went through all those layers and cut out a canyon, a mini Grand Canyon, in one day. So that's one of the things that we talked about last week. This week, I want to talk about Specimen Ridge here in Yellowstone, and we go to Mount St. Helens for this, because when Mount St. Helens, we showed you the video last week when this whole side of this mountain just came down, and it took Spirit Lake right there and made it come up this whole ridge here, and the ridge that the guy who's taking the picture on. Water came up onto that ridge and then went back down into the valley and took the whole forest with it. And so today, this is Spirit Lake. It's actually much bigger now than it was, but it has all these logs laying on top of it now. And you can see there's thousands of trees floating on Spirit Lake. Well, here's what's happening now, and this is what I say, 40-something years later. They're doing some underwater excavation there now, and trying to see what's happening underwater with all these logs. So here's what's happening. At first, they were all just floating like this, but as the years went by, the trunks, they got saturated with water, and because there's more material here than there is here, the logs would start to turn upright like this, and they would float like this. And then after a while, as they got heavier and heavier, they would drop to the bottom. Okay, so they dropped here. And it's standing up right now. And then more layers would come in from the movement of the water and produce more layers, and it would look like this tree was growing here. Okay, and then another log would drop down in another layer, and it would look like it was growing here. And then another log would drop down in this layer, and it would look like it was growing there. And so if you drain the lake, let's say 100 years from now, you drain this lake, it could look like, oh, here's trees in this layer. That was a forest that lived millions of years ago. And here's another layer with trees. That was another forest that lived millions of years ago. And another one, hundreds of thousands of years ago, and on it goes. So what's happening here in Spirit Lake is the very thing that we believe happened at Specimen Ridge in Yellowstone. That there was a flood, a worldwide flood. Those trees were not growing there that are in Specimen Ridge. They were transported there. They laid there at the top for a certain amount of time and then did this process here. The interesting thing is here, these roots, so there's a certain amount of roots, but there's not, there's only a portion of the root ball here. And so when they come down here, they realize, okay, there's just a root ball here. The tree did not grow here. There's not enough roots for that. Well, now they have gone to Specimen Ridge and dug under some of these trees that they thought grew there, and they realized, you know what? There's just a ball here. There's not petrified roots going down and everything. This is just a ball. And so even they are now coming to terms with the fact that these trees were transported there by a flood. Okay? Couldn't be Noah's flood, though. It's got to be some flood that happened millions of years ago. But they're coming to terms with the fact that this is a water event, a huge water event. And so here's a picture of what they call polystrate fossils. This is a petrified tree here. And look at it, it's going through all of these layers. Now, through the evolutionary worldview, this layer was, laid down 50 million years ago. And this tree grew out of it. And then another layer was laid down millions of years later. And then another layer, and then another layer. Well, what would have happened to that tree if it was growing there over millions of years? It would have disintegrated. It wouldn't be there. It'd fall down, and turn to dust. It's not going to sit there for millions of years and allowing layer after layer to do it over millions of years. But a tree growing here or that was transported here could be in a situation like we just saw, and then layer after layer after layer buries it very quickly. Okay? So our view of how polystrate fossils work makes sense. The tree is there and then very quickly gets buried by layer after layer after layer. That makes sense. But to say that you think that that tree stood there dead for millions of years while one layer after another slowly buried it, it just doesn't make sense. That's why I say, not only does creation have answers for the geology that is around, but I believe we have much better answers than the evolutionary worldview. All right? So here's some of the logs laying, and you can see them. They're floating upright, and they say scientists estimate that there are 20,000 trees in the bottom of Spirit Lake. Many of them are buried upright, and some are already 15 feet deep in sediments, because the sediments just keep coming in, and the movement of the water is creating new layers, and it's making the lake, the whole. Because of Mount St. Helens, it's a very different kind of situation that we would expect in a flood. This is from Geoscience. Again, this is a evolutionary site here, but here they say this. The eruption of Mount St. Helens in May of 1980 carried thousands of trees into Spirit Lake, where a giant log raft formed. Many of these broken stumps, especially those with roots, now float suspended vertically in the water. This phenomenon could have been responsible for erect petrified trees in other volcanic areas such as Yellowstone. Okay, so they're coming to terms with this. And this is at the bottom of the lake, and look, these trees are just standing upright at the bottom of the lake, and if you didn't know better, you'd think they grew there before there was a lake there, before there was a flood there. The logs that were deposited in the lake during the Mount St. Helens eruptions still remain and cover a large portion of the surface of the water. The bare logs sink upright to the bottom of the lake due to the higher density of the root end and land on layers of volcanic ash, sediment, and Specimen Ridge is layer after layer of volcanic ash. Okay, same situation. The high mineral content of the, this is interesting, the high mineral content of the water rapidly petrifies the logs in upright position as transplanted stumps. Spirit Lake is the first location where this process has been observed. We've been told all of our life that petrification of wood takes what? Millions of years, right? The logs in Mount St. Helens and Spirit Lake are already petrifying because of the high mineral content in the water from the volcano. And we said that's what the flood was. The flood was filled with volcanic activity, doing the very same thing that we see here. Here's another log laying down there that's becoming petrified. And this is the next quote is from the Yellowstone U.S. Department of Interior. Here's what it says. In 1900, the theory was that the petrified trees on Specimen Ridge in Yellowstone were forests petrified in place. This theory remained dominant through most of the 20th century. A more recent theory proposes the trees were uprooted by volcanic debris flows and transported here. In 1980, the eruption of Mount St. Helens supported this idea. Its mud flows transported trees and deposited some trees upright, similar to what we see at Specimen Ridge. Isn't that cool? So now, here we are. For about 100 years, there's this sign that says 27 layers, millions of years. No, theoretically, or nothing like that. It's just as fact. As fact. Now, 100 years later, like, okay, we got to change our facts and put a new sign up. Okay, so now there's a new sign there that has a whole different story with it. And the whole bottom half of the sign is a picture. And what is that picture of? Of Mount St. Helens and Spirit Lake. Right there it says Mount St. Helens erupted from Mount St. Helens eruption. And they're now using, in Yellowstone, the Mount St. Helens idea for Specimen Ridge instead of millions of years and 27 different forests. Isn't that cool? Very cool. Okay, so this was a longer one. I'm just gonna hit different national parks and just kind of give you one or two ideas of different national parks of how things could have been done. Okay, this is still in the Yellowstone area here, Mammoth Hot Springs. Okay. How many of you been to Yellowstone? Quite a few of you. Did you go to Mammoth Hot Springs? It's a very interesting place. But according to them, this ridge here is a remnant of a cataclysmic volcanic explosion that occurred 600,000 years ago, which is actually very young for them. Usually it's millions, okay? Here it's 600,000. So they say this has taken 600,000 years to grow to what you see here now, okay? And again, all of these things this is what they theorize happened. Then along come creationists and say, okay, we have a different theory, but we can show that is happening. Yours, you can't show. You're guessing it took 600,000 years. There was no video, for this to take 600,000 years. We have video. We have pictures. We, in this particular case, have the TP formation. Anyone ever been here up in Wyoming? This is outside of Yellowstone. It's called the TP Fountain, and this is the sign that's there. It says this structure started in 1903 and was created by piping hot mineral water through a vertical pipe built into a rock pyramid. As the water exits the top of the pipe, it flows over the structure, it cools and deposits the deposits on. So what they did is there was, mineral water coming out of there, so they piped it over to here, and they put the pipe up like this, and then they took rocks and just laid the rocks around it and allowed this water to flow over the rocks at its natural rate. Nothing man-made here except that they moved the water from here to there. Well, over 100 years now, look what's happened. This thing is probably 20 feet tall and a product of 100 years, okay? So again, they can believe that something like that big takes hundreds of thousands of years, but we have evidence that it doesn't, okay? As a matter of fact, if you were to take TP Fountain to the Mammoth Lakes area, this is a little different area, but it's the same thing. Again, they would say this is 500,000 years worth of growth here, okay? But if you were to take TP Fountain and put it right there next to it, it looks an awful lot like it. Matter of fact, if I were to take away the background right here, boom, where's Waldo? I mean, it's gone. And it's about, and that the size is correct here, okay? So TP Fountain is about the same size as these, but it only took 100 years to do that. So we say, you know what, this is probably hundreds of years worth of growth here, maybe thousands, I don't know, but not hundreds of thousands or millions of years, okay? So that's another one there. How about Arches National Park? I'm going to show you a video here real quick. Now they say, evolutionists say, that all of these arches are layers of dirt that were blown in by wind, and then wind and water, water streams and that kind of thing eventually eroded away these and made these arches. And I sincerely tried trying to find, give me some details of how you think this would have happened by wind, that it would create an arch like that. And they are not very forthcoming on how something like this could be created by wind. The other thing is that arches are not being formed there today in arches. Why? They're collapsing. They're collapsing, but there's not any arches being formed there today. Our answer to that is because it's not underwater anymore. Okay, so no, there's no more arches being formed there. They're collapsing, but there's no new ones being formed. Okay, this is wall arch here, and here's wall arch today. It collapsed. Okay, and there have been 47 arches that have collapsed since 1977 in Arches National Park. Now, you tell me, there should not be any arches left in Arches. If you look at this rate here, there's about 2,000 arches in Arches National Park. 47 of them have collapsed in the last 50 years since they started keeping track. If you go back, I mean, there should be no arches left. Do you follow me? There should be no arches left in that park if it's millions of years old at the rate of them collapsing 47 every 50 years or so. Okay, so there's another evidence. So there's just one thing, a couple things there for arches. Okay, how about Zion National Park? Anyone know the name of this? What?
Checkerboard.
Yes, Checkerboard Mesa. Checkerboard Mesa. Now, creationists and evolutionists agree that this was a sand dune, that it's a petrified sand dune. Okay, but there's a difference. Evolutionists say that this is a wind-blown sand dune that was created over millions of years by wind and then somehow became petrified, all right? So it was sand and then it became turned into rock. What many people don't realize is that underwater sand dunes are formed also from running water. Water moving, wind blowing causes sand dunes. Water moving also causes sand dunes. I showed you the one last week at the Santa Clara River that's kind of like a sand dune, right? So those can happen underwater too. Well, how do you know if they are underwater sand dunes or wind-blown sand dunes? This is so frustrating because this is so easy to figure out. Okay, here's how it is. If it's a wind-blown sand dune, the layers are at approximately a 32 degree angle. Okay, in here, all these layers in here. Approximately 32 degrees they should be if it was windblown. Underwater sand dunes are not nearly as steep. They have a much gentler angle, okay, at about 20%, okay? Well, they've done the math on Checkerboard Mesa, and guess what? The cross-bedding in Checkerboard Mesa averages at 17%. Now, is 17 closer to 20 or 32? I mean, it's almost right at where it should be if this is an underwater sand dune, okay? And yet they say, no, this is a wind-blown sand dune. Well, it's the Coconino sandstone in Grand Canyon is also supposedly a wind-blown sand dune in the canyon. And here's how they look at creationists and kind of laugh at us. Okay, here's an example. When creationists suggest that a worldwide flood deposited all the layers in the Grand Canyon, secular geologists laugh. That can't be, they say, because one of the canyon's major layers was formed by a desert over millions of years. It's filled with fossilized sand dunes, which are wind-blown deposits that have hardened into stone. You can't deposit desert sands during a global flood. And so they look at us with the Coconino sandstone and say, that is a wind-blown layer. Your flood could never have done that. Well, what's their evidence that it's a wind-blown layer? They see the strata in here and that it's very similar to what we see at Checkerboard Mesa. Okay, and here's evolutionists saying this: when measuring over 200 crossbed dips in Grand Canyon's Coconino sandstone, there was found an average dip of only 20%. Remember that? Windblown is 32%, waterborne is 20%. It's perfect. It's perfect. And yet they insist that that layer was blown over for millions of years. It blew. And again, this just doesn't make sense because it's all the same. How does the wind blow dirt for millions of years and it's all the same color? You know, it never blows a different color dirt. You know, it just doesn't make sense. Where with we say that whole layer was probably laid down in a week. And therefore, it's all the same stuff. We would expect it to be the same color, okay? But if it was laid down over millions of, why is it the same color? You mean there was no other color dirt to be blown in during all those millions of years? You know, it just doesn't make sense. And they even admit here, notice the name of the article here is, can compaction account for the lower than expected crossbed dips in the Coconino sandstone? Okay, so they say, oh, it must have been the weight that compacted it and made it at the angle. Well, they can use that excuse if they want, but what they're acknowledging here is that it's not at the levels that they would expect it to find. They would expect it to be at 32 degrees, but it's at 20 degrees, okay? All right, how about Snow Canyon? right in our backyard. Couldn't find nearly as much on Snow Canyon because it's just a state park as opposed to a national park. But the interesting thing is that the rock that is in Snow Canyon is the same rock that's in Zion. Okay? This layer is in Zion. This layer is in Zion. That's how big this layer is. Okay? And much bigger than that, by the way. Here's their explanation for Snow Canyon. Approximately 183 million years ago, winds swept up massive dunes that eventually covered what is now Snow Canyon. These dunes, as much as 2,500 feet thick, gradually cemented into Navajo sandstone that the visitors see today. This stone layer is made up of grains of the same thing that one sees in a modern dune or beach, light-colored quartz sand. Okay, so they say that these sand dunes are windblown in here again, okay? Over millions of years, they blew and built up and built up and built up. So I tried to find as much as I can on Snow Canyon. Here's just some of the facts that I found, okay? First of all, this is the same sandstone in Zion, Navajo sandstone, that Checkerboard Mesa is made out of. Checkerboard Mesa was formed underwater. And this is the exact same layer that Checkerboard Mesa is, okay? So it only makes sense that it also was born underwater, okay? This is conclusive, there's marine fossils found in this sandstone. If these are sand dunes that were blown in over why are there saltwater sea creatures embedded in the layers? This doesn't make sense. Our theory is this is water coming in from the ocean, and it's bringing a lot of sea life with it and compacting them layer after layer after layer. It makes sense. We would expect to find sea life in these. And that's not just here, it's in the Coconino Sandstone in Grand Canyon also that they claim is blown in. And it has sea life in it. That does not make sense. Why would the wind blow only red dirt for millions of years and then only white dirt for millions of years? Okay, so down below they say obviously the bottom layer was formed first, and it blew for millions of years, slowly building up layer after layer of red dirt. And then all of a sudden, boom, it's only layer after layer of white dirt. Why is that? It just doesn't make sense to me. If it's something that's being brought in by water and being laid down quickly, it makes total sense that it would be different colors. Okay. These that both here and in Zion contain bent strata. We'll get into that in just a minute. Those of you who saw the movie last night, they talked about bent strata. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But this also contains what is called current lineation, which so far as has been found is only in marine dunes. Wind does not blow in the same direction for millions of years. Okay, so what they're saying here is all of these sand dunes were created from the same direction, basically, is what it's saying. Okay? And we would expect that. The water's coming in one direction and creating these things overnight. Okay? They say they built up over millions of years. Why is the wind only blowing in one direction over millions of years? Matter of fact, I have a video, and I won't show it, but a geologist, he's walking through Snows Canyon, and he's saying this. He's saying all of these have the same direction, and it shows us the direction that the wind was blowing during the Jurassic period. The Jurassic period was millions of years. You're telling me the wind only blew in one direction for millions of years? It doesn't make sense. Believing that all of this came in one flood sweep, a tsunami, makes sense. I'd expect it all to be in one direction. Okay? So that's just a little something for Snow Canyon there. Bryce Canyon. hoodoos, these are hoodoos, by the way. All these pillars, they call them hoodoos, form over millions of years of erosion in areas where a thick layer of soft rock is covered by a thin layer of hard rock. That much is true. But the millions of years, where do they get that? Remember, we'll do carbon dating or radiometric dating in a week or two. But can you radiometric date sedimentary rocks? You guys remember? No, you can't. There's no metric radioisotopic dating that will measure sedimentary rock, the dates of sedimentary rock. And so, how do they know it's millions of years? They believe it's millions of years. Well, I showed you a picture last week. This is, a canyon that was formed in Georgia. And it carved out the canyon about 100, 200 years ago. But ever since then, erosion has been carving all of these things out. And look, hoodoos are starting to form already. Here, way back here, these pillars. Very similar to Bryce Canyon. In less than 200 years, this is turning into a miniature Bryce Canyon. Again, evidence that this can happen very quickly. The other thing to ask yourself with Bryce is very similar to arches, is look at these things. There should be stones like this laying at the bottom of this canyon, galore, if this has been around for millions of years. Shouldn't there? Yet, here they are hanging on by nothing, and you look down at the bottom of the canyon and there's very little debris. If this was around for millions of years, these things should be breaking off one after another, and they should be piled at the bottom of this canyon. Yet here they are, hanging on in these very precarious things, showing you that these could not have been there all that long. And it doesn't look like they're going to be there that much longer either.
Now, those are wind-shaped, though, right?
Pardon?
The hoodoos are wind.
No.
Water and wind?
No. Flowing water. We believe it's flowing
not
water.
laying down.
Well, no, I'm not saying wind doesn't have anything to do with it. Erosion, more water erosion than wind from rain, freezing, and then it expands and it does do some of that, but it doesn't take millions of years is the point. We agree basically that how these were formed. They just say it's millions of years. We say, no, I don't think so. If it was millions of years, these things would be tumbling and this valley would be filled with the top of these pillars, and they're just not there. Okay, Carlsbad Cavern is one of my favorite places. We're told always that these stalactites take millions of years to form, at least hundreds of thousands of years to form. Okay, just so you know, for a quick teaching thing, a stalactite is hanging on tight from the roof. Okay, a stalagmite is coming up from the ground. Okay, and it's actually dripping from a stalactite is creating the stalagmite. And if they come and they keep doing it, they might form a column. This is called a column where they actually meet right here, okay? So stalactites create stalagmites, and they might create a column. That's how you can remember the differences there. But does it take millions of years to create these stalactites? Okay. This is a picture taken in 1987 of level 5 in the lead mine in Australia. The mine was 55 years old at the time of this photo. These are stalactites, these are stalagmites, and to give you a sense of how big these stalactites are, right here, there's 2 men standing right there. Okay, so these are 20, 30-foot stalactites and stalagmites that are the size of a man here. And the cave is only 55 years old, creating these stalactites. It doesn't have to take millions of years to create these. Okay, here's These are called wave stalactites. They're all called shawl stalactites, where they have kind of this wave to them, okay? And we're told in Carlsbad Cavern that these are millions of years old, okay? But here, these look very similar to what's in Carlsbad Cavern, and this is a mining tunnel less than 150 years old. And it created all of these very similar stalactites and stalagmites, and even a couple columns, okay? This is a sign right here that you used to be able to read, saying, giving directions or something, but it's completely covered over now with the mineralized water. And so again, this was formed in obviously 150 years, these stalactites. It doesn't take millions of years. You can believe it takes millions of years to form these if you want, but we have evidence right here that it doesn't have to take millions of years, okay? And how about the formation of caves? Does that have to take millions of years? This is a video. The video is called The Young Age of the Earth, if you want to look it up. It's dated. It's done back in the 80s, and so it's you can tell it's old. But the information is solid. Okay, this is a flood that happened here in Utah affected the Glen Canyon Dam. Watch this.
A modern example of rapid erosion of bedrock from cavitation comes from Glen Canyon Dam on the Colorado River just above the Grand Canyon. Excessive snowfall from the high country of the upper Colorado River basin in late spring of 1983 caused excessive runoff that poured into Lake Powell at rates of up to 148,000 cubic feet per second. This rapid inflow threatened to overflow Glen Canyon Dam. To control the high flow rates, the power plant was run at full capacity, releasing 28,000 cubic feet per second through the turbines. Then the outlet tubes were opened to drain another 17,000 cubic feet per second. This was still not enough. The emergency situation required engineers to risk damage to the spillway tunnel. And on June 15, the 40-foot diameter left spillway tunnel was opened to drain an additional 13,000 cubic feet per second, which was then raised to 17,000 cubic feet per second. Then on June 28, the flow was increased to 32,000 cubic feet per second. At this point, the water exiting the tunnel became red, and noticeable ground vibrations, earthquakes, were felt by engineers. Large blocks of concrete and bedrock came hurling from the 40-foot diameter tunnel. After closing the spillway tunnel, the survey team discovered extensive cavitation damage. The 3-foot thick steel-reinforced concrete lining of the tunnel was penetrated by huge pits. At an elbow where the tunnel levels out, a hole 32 feet deep, 150 feet long, and 40 feet wide was cut through the lining into red sandstone bedrock. This hole required 63,000 cubic feet of concrete to fill. The repair process to the enormous hole shows the vast extent of the damage. The speed of erosion in the Glen Canyon Dam spillway tunnel occurred very rapidly during the period when the red color of water appeared and ground vibrations were generated. It is possible that cavitation was pulverizing concrete, steel, and sandstone at the rate of 1,000 cubic feet per second during the peak period of erosion. The destructive effects of cavitation at Glen Canyon Dam tell us the Grand Canyon could have been eroded very quickly by the sudden release of a huge volume of water above the canyon,
which we talked about last week. But anyway, this is a huge, look at this cavern here. This was formed in one day, this cavern here. And it's, they went and they filled it in. So I think today they would probably leave it and use it as a tourist attraction. But anyway, there's a cave that was formed in one day through what? Water. Okay. All right. Oh, and this is, okay, how long did it take to form the Grand Canyon, the Carlsbad Caverns? Here's their explanation. It says, what geologists used to believe was fact in terms of dating a cave. Now is speculation, Trout says. From 1924 to 1988, there was a visitor's sign above the entrance of Carlsbad Caverns that said that Carlsbad was at least 260 million years old. In 1988, the sign was changed to read 7 to 10 million years old. That's a huge difference there. Then for a little while, the sign read that it was 2 million years old, and now the sign is gone. That tells you something. All right, the wave. Anyone ever been to the wave in Arizona? This is between Kanab and Page that you can hike into there. This is called bent strata here, okay? How do you bend rock? Okay, that's my question. According to evolutionary theory, all this bent strata that you find all over the world, this is just a really cool one here. They say happened after the rock had hardened, okay? It's called folded strata, bent strata, but hardened rock layers do not bend, okay? But they can bend while they are still soft. So the question is, were things like this we were just up in Cedar this past week, and they have these all over up in Cedar Canyon. Bent rock like this, okay? Now, we both agree, creationists and evolutionists, that this strata that's bent now used to be straight, okay? And that something came up, there was an uplift, and forced this curvature to happen. Now, but if all of these layers are rock like this, and they're hardened rock, and something pushes them up, is it going to bend the rock, or is it going to break the rock? It's going to break the rock, right? That's what they basically believe happened, is that it bent this rock. Okay, we say, no, all of those layers were laid down very quickly, and before they even had time to dry, there was something came up, an uplift here, and bent it all while it was still soft. Okay, it makes more sense. Okay, now, this is I was trying to find a scientific explanation according to evolutionists of how this could have happened. And this is the first video that I came upon right here. So I'm going to show you a picture of it, or a clip of it. You tell me if it makes sense.
Rocks are brittle. Why don't they break when they bend? Observe the following experiment. In this experiment, the cigarette represents a rock stratum. The foil, tightly wrapped, represents other rock layers, providing pressure and support for the rock stratum. The cigarette is brittle, similar to sedimentary rock. Observe how the cigarette is folded into this cute little ball. After unwrapping the cigarette, you will find that the cigarette, because it is supported by the foil, is allowed to bend without breaking. This video does not advocate smoking.
Okay, anybody see anything wrong with that experiment. What's that?
I didn't know foil was that old.
Foil, yeah, okay. Anybody see any flaws with that explanation? He's using a cigarette, which is soft, to prove that you can bend this. He's making our point for us. A cigarette is soft. You can bend a cigarette and have it. Sarah, did you have something?
I was just wondering, what about heat?
What about what?
Heat, could heat lead to waves like that?
Well, that's one of their explanations, is that heat could do that. But again, I couldn't find any experiments where they could show that that you could take a rock and in any way that is hardened and make it bend,
Especially like.
you know? Josh, you want to come up here and try to bend this rock for me? Where are you? Come on up here. Let's try to bend that for me, would you? Not happening? Maybe it would bend. It's not bending. Okay. If we had someone else come up here, they could probably break it, but nobody's going to be able to bend it. Okay? Yes.
So even like hot temperature, like lava, or I don't know, like if it's really, really hot,
Oh yeah, lava, sure.
it could
Lava
melt.
is liquefied rock, okay? But this is not, this is sandstone here. This is not lava. Okay, this is sandstone right here. No matter how you try to bend this, you're not going to be able to bend sandstone. Okay? It is possible with lava that, yeah, definitely you can get bent strata from that, but not from sandstone, not sedimentary rock. Anyway, I was looking at some of the comments under this experiment, and here's a couple of the comments. Oops, I didn't want that. Didn't want that. All right, where am I? There we go. Okay, let's make it less like a magic trick and a bit more like a scientific experiment. Instead of a cigarette, try using a stick of chalk.
Yeah.
Okay? Here's another one. How can a cigarette justify solid rock? I've seen extremely folded rock strata in Washington, my home state, and it's just plain obvious that the sedimentary strata was deposited rapidly and bent rapidly before hardening. Okay? And I think that makes perfect sense. Okay? Now they can come up with ideas of how this can slowly happen over millions of years. Okay? That's what they believe. Okay? But I think our theory, where it's all soft and gets bent while it's still soft, makes a lot more sense than trying to bend a hardened rock. Okay? There's another one. Where are we? I might have to skip this one. No, okay. All right, let me just go back and just show you a quick video here. Okay, I'm going to show you this video of how they believe it happened and how then we would say say it happened, okay? So, here's the continental plates coming together, okay? And they believe that all this strata is hard rock, and it's coming very slowly across, and this is called continental drift, and then it hits the next continent and pushes it up and forms all of these folds, okay? Not explaining, why isn't it breaking? Why are there no breaks in these folds? You look at almost all of these folds that you look at up in Cedar or wherever, there's not any breaks in them. They're just bent. If these are hardened rocks hitting each other slowly like this, They're going to pulverize each other. They're going to break each other, but they're not going to bend each other, okay? Going back now, we believe in continental sprint, where this happened very quickly. All of these layers are wet, still soft, okay, happening in a matter of 1 year, and these continents bump into each other, soft, and now this makes sense. There's no breaks, it's just bended strata, and then over the millennium, all of this turned into rock, hardened and turned into rock in a bent form, okay? So it makes sense that it was formed while it was soft and then lithified. Doesn't make sense that it was hard and somehow it was able to bend hardened rock, all right?
Don't we have any examples of hardened rock lifting and breaking now?
Oh, sure.
Would there not be an earthquake?
Oh, sure. And every
Then
time
why
it's
would you not
broken.
expect the same thing?
Exactly, every time, I mean, all the time we have that. Earthquakes causing this kind of thing to happen. You never see bent rocks come out of it. You see broken rocks come out of it, okay? Not bent. All right. Okay. And last thing for today, Doug, God, I keep doing this.
My name is Colton.
Sorry, Colton. All right. All right, here's a rock that somebody found. They were walking along the beach, and there's all these rocks, and they kicked this one, and noticed there was something different about it. And they turned it over, and it's a Hot Wheels car that had been turned into rock, covered with rock, basically, okay? And, you know, looking at these rocks here, we would be told they're millions of years old, okay? But here's a rock, right in with the rest of them, that clearly is not millions of years old, right? This is clearly only decades old at the most, yet it looks very much like the other rocks, okay? Just another example how stones can be formed very quickly. This is, reminds me that it says, some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples," because they were worshiping Jesus. He replied, "I tell you, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." And I think that's what this stone is doing here, is crying out that creation is real, is true. Surtsey is an island that was established in 1963. This was a form, in other words, this island was not here in 1962. It was formed by a volcanic eruption, and today it's got greenery growing on it. It has animal life on it, particularly birds, but small animals have made their way there. And again, that was only 60 years ago, 60 years ago. And this was an interesting article here. It says, this is from National Geographic. It says, the boulders on Iceland's Surtsey Island may look old, but they are actually as young as the island itself, which was born after volcanic eruptions in 1963. So the point is, all of these rounded stones here, they say they look millions of years old. That's what he says. The boulders on Iceland Surtsey may look old, but we know better. They're only as old as the island, 60 years old, okay? And they've all been rounded, okay? So they think, well, it takes millions of years to take a jagged rock and make it become smooth and round, you know? Well, no. In 60 years that was done, and all of these rocks are on the island of Surtsey. They look millions of years old according to them, but they're not, okay? All right, any questions, any comments? Like I say, this was just kind of touching on everything. You could do a whole thing on just Zion, a whole session like this, you know. But any comments, questions?
You wanna
Yes.
do that now?
Hang on a minute, what's that?
In your studies, did you find, since everything tends to be mineral-based, and, what types of minerals and what types of, sediment, is the periodic table true?
Chemicals, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, we have no argument with that. Yeah, that's logical science and, I mean, when we get into the radiometric dating stuff, we've got differences with them in there. We agree with the process that's happening in those rocks. It's just, we don't agree that this is taking millions of years, and we have evidence, solid, rock solid evidence that those rocks are not millions of years old. We'll get to that, okay? Rock solid. Yet they believe they're millions of years old. So, some of the processes we may disagree with, but in general, we agree with all that stuff. What did you say, Mauricio?
No, I was being facetious, but there was a question that I had all day that I kind of wanted to throw out there, just to wrap my mind around this whole session. What is really going on, and I see your passion, and I see all the evidence this way and that way. We seem to be fighting back and forth, and I kind of understand why, because we don't want people to believe what's not true. But exactly, I haven't really grasped what's going on.
Okay. Why does it matter, basically? Why does it matter? Yeah,
Well, I know it
that's
matters.
a great, no, but that's a great question. Why does it matter? Does it matter? Well, a couple of reasons that you have to go back and watch our first session for one thing, because I get into why does it matter. But real quickly, first of all, we believe the Bible is true, okay? And there's no way to stick millions of years into the account of the Bible, okay? You have to turn day 1 into 1 billion years, and day 2 into 1 billion years, day 3 into 1 billion years, okay?
Right.
And you have to completely distort what the Bible is saying there. So that's number 1. The other thing is, we don't believe evolution happened. They need the millions and billions of years in order for a pond scum to turn into you.
Right.
You know, we all get that, you, but, no, I'm kidding.
No, but I get that linear thing that there's, everything's missing, all the evidence is missing of what they're trying to say.
Absolutely. Yet they hold on to it because what's the alternative? This. What we're talking about today is the alternative. They don't have another theory. They are committed to an old earth and evolution. And they have to remain committed to that because, as I showed you that quote the other day, evolutionist who says, even if all the data points towards creation, it has to be pushed aside because it's not naturalistic, meaning that there's a God involved in our process. Okay, so sweep all this evidence under the rug because we say God had something to do with it, and so that's inconceivable. We can't allow God into the process. They want him to be naturalistic. And it was like I said, I have this computer here that's clearly intelligently designed, but I would ask all of you to come up with a theory of how this computer got here, but you have to come up with a naturalistic explanation. Intelligent design is not allowed. So come up with a theory of where this computer came from, and I'll accept any of your theories, but I won't accept that there was an intelligent designer that created this. So they're excluding the correct answer. All the other answers would be wrong, but you'll accept those. The answer that is correct, you will reject because there was an intelligent designer behind it. And this computer is not nearly as complicated as a living cell. Okay, we saw Bill Gates. I showed you a quote a month or two ago where Bill Gates says that the software, the DNA is much more complicated than any software that we have come up with. And yet we're supposed to believe that that happened all by itself. And there was no intelligence, and yet it is more complicated than this computer. So, anyway, watch session 1 we get more into that on there, okay? Good question though. Yeah,
I think Sarah had a question.
yeah.
All right. I was just wondering again about the folding.
Mhm.
And is there a difference with like the grain size and the minerals that are in the rock, so that when starts happen they would fold, or it just doesn't fold, like it just brittles? You know what I mean?
Well, I'll have to talk with you separately on that, because I'm not sure what you're saying. So let's talk privately on that, okay? Anything else? Yes?
It just appears that they're changing the definitions of the terms what we believe were definitions of words. And if they can change that, then they will get us in deception just by changing what we call rocks.
Uh-huh.
They might try to define it as something petrified, where it was probably created as a rock.
Mm-hmm.
It was, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
All they're doing is trying to get us with the other, not the true origin.
We'll get into more of that when we get into radiometric dating. Okay. All right. Yes.
I had one other point. If you want to see how quickly the rock will form, just turn off your water softener for a couple months.
Yeah, that's true.
Because the calcium that builds up very rapidly builds up quickly on all your faucets in your house,
Mhm.
all throughout your house.
Uh-huh.
But the softener takes all those minerals out of it.
Right.
That's why people use soft water.
And that's what causes fossilization most of the times, is calcium penetrating into the bone.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, anyone else? All right, let's close with prayer. Father, we just give you this evening and help us to just trust your word. We thank you for the evidence that's out there, and just pray that this would build up our faith to help us to trust you more, Lord. That this would just a faith affirming, and to know that our head and our heart does not have to be misaligned, but that they can be lined up and both in something that makes sense. So we just thank you for that, Father. Thank you, Jesus. It's in your name we pray. Amen. That was one of the illustrations that the guy after the credits, one guy says, when I learned all of this, it was like my heart was here, but my head was here with evolution. And he says, this took and aligned my head with my heart. And I thought that was a great illustration.